All right, good morning, PT on Ice crowd. It is Monday, November 26th. We are right at the precipice of December. I am Mike Eisenhart, host of Mondays with Pop, here with you this morning, and we'll be talking a little bit about things that are related to population health. So it's 8:30 Eastern time, and maybe a few people will roll in. We'll see how it goes. New setup behind me this morning just for today. Ironically, a couple of my kids don't have school today. Somehow they just don't go to school anymore. I'm not really sure what that is. I think that when you get in high school, you get these like extended holidays. So anyway, they actually have today off as well. I've got some sleeping teenagers, so I decided to kind of come up into the office area upstairs and figure I'd leave them alone a little bit. So this morning, hey Jason, good morning. So this morning I'm going to talk about the future of history. And it's kind of a play on words, and a little bit came from the Thanksgiving time frame. But before I do, let me start the clock so that I'm on track here and staying on track. Okay, so 15 minutes and we're rolling. So good morning, Monday, 11/26, and we're talking about the future of history. And like I said, it's to me it's a little bit of a snarky title for something that I think we all sort of experience. And that is this idea that things kind of are cyclical, right? That there's this kind of like replay of certain things, and that the world kind of goes in maybe cycles, maybe it goes in a sort of sine wave where, we have peaks and valleys and we make progress over time. And some people might describe it as a stepwise progression. That's a term I like, this idea of kind of going up and then leveling off and going up and leveling off, or unfortunately going down and leveling off, or whatever. But the bottom line is we seem to have these kind of phases, these cycles. And so this past weekend, Thanksgiving, sort of weekend, and Thanksgiving, as I mentioned last time, is a big deal in our house. And so we went to my parents' house, and my mom had this big pile of books, and she's like, hey, we're cleaning out, eventually they're going to sell their house, I guess. And I keep kind of prodding them, but we're cleaning out, and we've got these books. They're like old business books, see if you might be interested in any of them. And most of them are really pretty outdated. But bottom line is I went through and I was kind of like going through them. And I found this one great one. And I mean, it's just awesome because it's so pertinent. So it is a 1959, copyrighted book, The Management of Time. And the reason why it sort of spoke to me was because it couldn't be more like pertinent today than ever. I mean, so I want to just read two little things, and I think this is important. And then I'm going to kind of go into 5 things that I think we all need to sort of pick up on and understand. So here's the best part, right off the cover. In this age of rapid innovation and obsolescence, more and more people feel they are caught in a time squeeze. 1959. Those harassed by growing demands on their time will find this book a creative alternative to working still harder over still longer hours. Now, I read that and I was like, oh my gosh, this is fantastic, right? Like how perfect could it be? 1959, James T. McKay published out of like Englewood Cliffs, New Jersey, is spot on. He's nailing it with what we're going to be talking about 60 years later. And the feeling that providers and all of us are feeling more and more crunched with time than ever before. We're feeling more like we've got to work harder and longer hours and figuring out how to pull this thing off. And so it's almost like, kind of prescient in a sense. He's talking about things that were a big deal in 1959, I guess in the business world, or he wouldn't have written the book. But here we are, 60 years later, feeling the same pinch. And so it made me want to dive into this a little bit, right? And so I start diving into it, and just on the preface, I'm just going to, give you these, and then I'll stop with the book because it kind of ties in, right? So the preface is the new test for leadership. What makes a leader? And of course, you can, right off the bat, first line, you can realize how outdated this is, and the fact that we've, hopefully others will see this as progress too. What makes a leader? Is a man a leader when he is responsible for some people? Is he a leader, right? So like that should scream off the page for everybody. Like if that first line doesn't be like, oh God, 1959 makes you turn your stomach a little bit, but whatever. Is he a leader when he is the most intelligent man? Is he a leader when he is the most aggressive? The answers to these and similar questions may be either yes or no. What factors determine the answer? All right, here you go. A man is a leader to the degree that 1, he has a following. 2, his following is voluntary. And 3, he demonstrates to people the best method of getting what they want. And 4, he is the best man in the use of this method. Okay, so I'll leave the book alone. And to me, although you have to get by the language and kind of the cultural undertones that were, maybe appropriate then and aren't appropriate now, and like we have to kind of get okay with that and realize that there's a lot of development since then. But the principles aren't that far off than what we're talking about right now. Now, if you go on and you Google the terms, the democratization of healthcare, you'll find quite a bit out there. And there's actually one paper that is pretty interesting. It's a National Academy of Medicine, I think, paper, 2016. And they're talking about kind of this idea of giving healthcare back to the people, right? And that it's time to do this. And that's where sort of like the culture of health and health literacy and a lot of the things that we talk about in population health, reducing disparities, making it easy to get people access to care, all of those things. But yet then there's this other side. You can find even a TED Talk that I found like within maybe 3 to 5 weeks ago of a doctor talking a little bit about, and if you listen to him, he's really still talking about, well, you're going to get fooled out there. There's all this information that's bad information, and doctor knows best. And so there's kind of like this, this like cyclical scenario, right? Of like, we're in this place where we want to kind of get to the principles of leadership. We want to get to the principles of allow voluntary following, allow people to come and be the best at what you do, but allow them to come follow you and lead them toward better health, right? Be their partner on this journey toward better health. And that if we would do that, it would be fulfilling, and we might feel less crunched for time, or we might feel like we're doing a good job. So I started kind of thinking about that. And I started to say, well, okay, so I'm big on principles. That's where the elements come from, right? The 5, move, fuel, recover, endure, connect. Those are principles. Those are things that, in my opinion, are unfailing in health production. They produce health. You can distribute health that way. You can communicate with people. They're 5 kind of unfailing principles that, if you get them right, you're going to be okay. You're going to be far better off than if you don't. And so that's kind of the basis. And so, you've heard me use that term thousands of times probably on this podcast. So then I started thinking, all right, what are 5 things that, like, what are 5 principles that we could all use as this shift toward the democratization of healthcare happens, right? I mean, we could hold on, don't get me wrong. Like, you could definitely put your stake in the ground and like lock your nails in and hold on and hold on as best you can and not let the world change. I mean, you could do that. You could sort of say, nope, I'm the expert. I know everything. Come in, you do what I say, and you'll get better. Like, there are definitely groups who are going to do that. I think that's an old paradigm. I think that's sort of a dinosaur type paradigm, and I think it's going away. So you could do it. I wouldn't recommend it because I think that everything points to the fact that the consumer of healthcare or health, or however you want to phrase it, the customer, the client, the patient, for some people who, I've been told they really prefer that term. But at any rate, the power is trying to shift toward them. Right? The power is trying to go into the hand of the consumer, who will be able to guide themselves and their families and their communities to better health. And that healthcare isn't a carve out anymore. It's just part of life. It's just another thing to consider when making decisions. Right? That's where this whole thing wants to go. So what are the 5 principles? What are things that I think are critical if we're going to be there when it arrives? Right? And in many ways, that's I guess in many ways that's where we spend our time. Most of the time we spend our time saying, hey, we want to be sort of standing there when the world arrives. We have to build systems so that when the world arrives there, and we can kind of see where it's going, we're there and we're ready to go. And I think that's really what population health practice is for the conservative care professional. It's right now, it's in the midst of this chaos right now of trying to run in parallel 2 worlds at the same time. On one hand, you're kind of working on one side and you're saying, hey, I've got to kind of work in the traditional models that are there because that's what pays the bills. And on the other hand, it's like I have to prepare for when this shift slowly and steadily happens so that when I get there, when the world arrives, I'm there. I'm okay. I can manage. Now, large groups and large practices have the, I guess, wherewithal financially to break off a piece and say, yeah, you guys go do that. You create our innovation group who's going to be ready when we get there. And I think large health systems are doing that very, very aggressively. I think smaller groups and sort of the independent practitioner doesn't have the ability to do that because they have to spend so much time, right? 1959, they're so pressed for time that they can't split off. And so they've got to put all their effort into just generating enough money to stay afloat. And then so because of that, they can't split off and put time where it needs to go. And so the thought then was, all right, what can anybody do? What can any of us do? And these are things that, in thinking about it, I sort of look in the mirror on this. I know I need to work on some of these. So first, be available. That's number one. It's probably the most important thing at this point. Now, you may hate that. And I know to a certain degree, I cringe a little bit when I say this sometimes. But we tell our clients we're available. Like, I don't love phone calls at 3 o'clock in the morning, but if you need to make one and you think I'm the person for the job, I want you to call me. Be available, right? We are now on a global time clock. We are no longer on a 9 to 5. We are no longer on an 8 to 4. Like, no, we're not even on like a 10 to 7. Like, we're on a whenever you need me, I will be there. Okay? And the reason why is because that is the root of trust, right? That is the root of trust. And trust is going to be everything when it comes to the democratization of healthcare, because there is a lot of information out there and some of it is crap. Okay? But at the end of the day, like, I need someone who I can trust, who I know has my back, who I know is going to stand with me when times get tough. That the root of that is I am available to you. Now think about that. Think about your own relationships and think about the people who you truly trust. You know in your heart that when the shit goes down, or pardon me, when things get hard, okay, they will be there for you. There are not many people like that in most of our lives. There are a few. There are many who say they will be, and then when it gets really hard, they'll say, I just can't, okay? But there are other people who will be there, and you know they'll show up. So that's the first one, be available, okay? The second one is be understandable. And I sort of alluded to this last week, I think. Make it simple. Use a language that isn't lofty, that isn't, like overly educated sounding. Be a real person who talks in a real language, who's like the person you would, invite for dinner when no one's looking, who you just would hang out with, the person you'd sit down and watch a sports game with. That's who we want to be, the journey partner, right? We want to be the person on the road together, who's having a conversation, not the person who's coming in with information and poking and prodding and sounding really smart and puffing up our chest and aren't we so wonderfully smart and learned. No. Okay, the third one, be stubbornly consistent. Now this is one that I'm really probably pretty good at. As far as of all of them, stubbornness is probably not the one people say, oh Mike, you're so flexible all the time. Like, I kind of get locked into my thinking and like that's it. Be stubbornly consistent. Like whatever it is. And that's not just in your approach with the person, but also in what you practice. Like live it. Consistency will beat intensity every time. It's one of the reasons why we use the term endure, right? Endure. It's a long game. It's a steady march. It's the 20-mile march that we often refer to, the Jim Collins, keep slogging forward. Be stubbornly consistent. Now, that's going to sometimes irritate people. They're going to walk away, right? There will be clients and consumers and patients and friends and whatever who will walk away and say, hey, you know what? No, I'm looking for something else. And it is really hard, especially when you care for someone, to say, hey, listen, this is what we do here. Like, this is how we roll. Like, I will customize to whatever level I can, but when we get down to the roots, no. Like, we are stubbornly consistent with what we do. And it pays off for most people. Okay, the next one. Be fascinated and curious. I think this is a really important one because this gets to be a person who has voluntary followers. Quote, the following is voluntary. Health is fascinating. Like, it is unbelievable. Like, we're walking around in a literal miracle. Like, why don't we allow ourselves to be fascinated by it? To let that energy be infectious. To tell people, like, look, I don't know everything, but man, I can't wait to search out that answer because I learn something every day. Something new, something exciting every day. And like, that's not a thing I go to, courses to get. Like, that's a who I am. It's my being. Because that energy is infectious. I mean, nothing is as infectious as someone who has a sense of wonder about them. And so I think in the future, right, the future of history, the cyclical nature of this, it's going to get back to the fascinating nature of the human. how unbelievable and awesome we really are. And are we willing to be fascinated with our clients? And then last, the one that I probably need to work on the most, the one that I know I struggle with, and that is be fun. Be fun. Make it something people want to do. Like, it doesn't have to always be a grind. Yes, you can be consistent, but you can be consistently fun. And I think that's a really, really important one. Okay, sometimes healthcare is disguised as something else. It's sort of snuck in there. It's just snuck in the day-to-day actions, the behaviors. I mean, we know this, right? We know that 60% of Americans have a chronic condition, and we know that most of those chronic conditions are preventable. And we know that the things that prevent those conditions are day-to-day consistent actions, healthy behaviors, whatever you want to call it. We know that setting up an environment that allows those healthy behaviors, sort of facilitates those healthy behaviors, will generate health in the long run. And we know the earlier we start across the life course, the better it will be. Okay, so we know all of that. But how can we make it fun? How can we lay down that foundation and not make it a grind and not make it a chore, but make it fun? Okay, that is something, there's my time. That is something I think we are all going to have to wrestle with a little bit. If you want to be sort of in that sort of democratization of health, you have to organize people. Like, that's what it is. They have the votes now. What they choose to do with their healthcare. And it's going to be even more so in the future. As the cost continues to climb, okay, services like day-to-day services are going to become unreachable for people, right? They're not going to go in and pay a $50 copay 3 times a week. Like, it's just not going to happen. Therapists are already seeing that. The pinch is too great. People can't afford to do it, so they'll just not do it. But they might pay a little bit every single month to have access to something they enjoy, that they have fun, and they're sneakily getting some health on the back end. So we could talk about this, and I could dive into it much further, and I know I'm already over time, so I'm not going to do it anymore. But I think that's what we're facing. I think in many ways, we're facing a future that has a lot of the roots in the past. Okay, and a lot of those roots are things like just the classic kind of busyness of life is overwhelming. The costly nature of healthcare is overwhelming. People are sort of breaking down as a result of that. And so we need to track back those roots and principles and decide what is our practice going to look like. Now, the final thing I'll leave you with is we need a system to do it. You've got to have a system to do it so that you can produce consistency, right? Because if you're just erratic and you're all over the map and you're trying to do custom stuff for every single person, you'll never do it. It has to be built on a foundation of consistency. So the consistent system are your principles, defining those principles, and then building ways to get that every single time, right? To get automatic results every single time. That's where we're at. If you really want to know where healthcare is currently lagging, it's not that we don't know this stuff. It's that we can't consistently produce it. And when we can consistently produce it, we will have changed. So I'm going to leave it there. Future of history is this, right? Find your principles. Stick with them. Okay? Define what they are and give people back the power and just be a guide with them. Because the minute we can do that consistently and the minute we can do it as a group is the minute that we really change things. All right? There's more to come on this, without a doubt. There's more to come. Okay, if you're looking for more information, you know where to find us. aphpt.org, all the courses on ICE, and all of the various ways that you can reach out and contact us. I did a consult last night, essentially over Twitter, on direct message of someone I haven't talked to in a while. Okay, people will find trusted resources. When they do, they'll be willing to pay for it. Build your practice. Future of history. It's only Monday. Have a great week. It's a full week. I know that's tough getting back in the groove, but it's only Monday. So make it count.